Hi, Melissa. I'm very excited and really honored to be able to talk to you about this because this is an amazing film. Um, the trove of materials that you draw upon, has that always been in your family? Where did it come from?
Oh, thank you so much, Janet. It's so great to be able to sit here with you today and talk about Mr. Soul. I'm the one who's honored. The Ellis Haizlip was my uncle, and the thing was that we knew that he'd made this wonderful show. My parents were around when he first made the show called Soul, but because it was live,
And
it
you were a little girl at the
I
time.
was I was really young, and he was living with us at the time in on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, 80th Street and West End, for any of those New Yorkers out there. um, we when I look back and think about the first time I saw Soul as an adult, it was so long after the fact. Someone came to me and said, "Man, your uncle was amazing. I have a bootleg tape," and he was really quiet about it. "Got a bootleg tape of Al Green episode. It's like amazing. You need to see it." So first of all, I'm thinking, where did you find a bootleg tape of the Al Green episode? Well, we won't discuss that.
First of
So,
all, that's one of the great Al Green performances. That's not
oh,
like anything I've ever seen. Uh,
amazing. So we didn't actually have the episodes because they were live at the time, and so in the night from 1968 to 1973, nobody really had a video, a VHS or a recorder or anything. So it was something you had to experience in real time. So it took a long time to. It's kind of a combination of a wild goose chase, and a detective story, and a treasure hunt
so they
to
weren't on an
put it
archive
all together.
somewhere. They had not been kept together in an archive.
Well, there were some, and that's what I found out later, that Channel 13, WNET, which is the original presenting station of Soul and the flagship PBS station here in New York, they had an archive of at least, I think, 42 episodes. And they had been in the vault for like 45 years, which was just incredible.
And no one had ever asked to see them, or having some memory of what kind of incredible stuff was on them. No one had ever wanted them for research or anything.
I think so. In fact, some wound up in the Library of Congress.
Wow.
And what was interesting is that it became kind of like this mythical, like magical unicorn, almost like a black unicorn, if you will. For those who knew about the show and had experienced it and watched it in real time, it had this mythical status. But for those who haven't, it was kind of like the greatest show you've never heard of.
Was
And
it watched
so,
in your house?
pardon me?
Was it watched in your house?
Oh, yes, it was watched in my house. It was really a special occasion. There were so few black people on television in
So you saw
1968.
your Uncle Ellis doing this.
I never saw
You,
him do
you
it
would
because I
watch
was so
it.
young. But my parents went to all the tapings,
Oh, okay.
and my dad hosted one of the shows, and it was like a big event because Ellis was like the Pied Piper. He was always bringing people home who were part of the show, and James Earl Jones and Nikki Giovanni, and I didn't know who they were at the time, but I found out years later that it was James Earl Jones pinching my cheek, or it was Clifton Davis and Melba Moore, and I was hiding under the table because it was midnight. It would be late, and
Yeah.
after the shows, and Ellis loved to make um, oatmeal and strawberries. That was his thing. So he would invite the people who had just taped on the show to come back to our place and hang out. And when I heard that, I'd come running out my little, footy pajamas
How bad?
and Ellis, and I would hide under the table so my parents couldn't snatch me and put me back in bed. But I just remember thinking there's something magical happening here. I was too young to understand what it was, but later on in life I realized, my goodness, what a remarkable moment that was, and the way he mentored artists, and he had real relationships and friendships with them. So it wasn't just about celebrities, it was like building a community.
Oh, it's astounding to see what he put together and how much it mattered to people and how differently they performed compared to the way they performed for white audiences on the kind of
Mhm.
show that I saw them on later. There, Wilson Pickett is not like that's not like any performance I ever saw from him. The Al Green one is amazing. Billy Preston, just the music part alone.
Yeah.
What a wealth of stuff you had to work with.
It's
Uh,
such a gold mine, and there's something so it's almost heartbreakingly beautiful because you're seeing them in their prime. There's an innocence about it, but there's also like an intimacy. You can tell they're very comfortable, and the way they perform or interact with Ellis as a host is very different from the way they would have been, perhaps on the Tonight Show or Ed Sullivan or,
oh,
um, you know,
completely.
so they never had to like defend who they were or defend their blackness or have to stand up for themselves. And so you're seeing into this window of what looks like family and
Even
looks
what's
so
that about
familiar.
the Delphonics? The fact that most of that they ordinarily would be lip syncing, and here they get to really sing live. That makes a tremendous difference.
I think so too. It gives you this kinetic energy and this like insight into the true artistry as opposed to like the package deal that you would get, on a where they're lip syncing on a show and singing to the record.
So, what made you think I can take this and find a way to put it together, even though there's some tremendous number of hours and how many episodes? What gave you the impetus to actually go ahead?
Well, there were 130 episodes, and that was really exciting and daunting, of course, because you fall in love with all of them. And so, this idea of, well, how do we summarize or capitulate or launch into such a wonderful opus of artists and artistry? Um, what we did, which was really important for structuring the film, I know you can appreciate this, is we saw that we had three storylines. We had the story of Soul, which is pretty
Mhm.
easy. That's from 1968 to 1973, and with 130 episodes, and we had to choose which ones. That's storyline A. Then we had storyline B, which is the story of Ellis Haizlip, and we decided not to make it a cradle to grave documentary. We're just going to drop in on those 5 years from 68 to 73, tell you where he came from and what happened afterwards.
Because he lived
Then
in
we had
the
the third,
1990s, didn't he?
yeah, but we were just focusing on those 5 years that were the soul years.
Right.
And then we had the third storyline C, which is like the zeitgeist, like what was happening in the nation that would have created an opportunity for a show like Soul. The challenge was collapsing those three storylines into one. And we actually cut three different films so that we could honestly look and see where the parallels were. And that way, everything could earn its way in. So if you had a piece of archival, it had to do triple duty, right? It had to satisfy the first storyline of being from the show and a highlight, had to satisfy the second, had to have some relevance to Ellis
So you're a
Hazelip.
very organized person.
Yeah. And then the third, it had to
You're,
speak to. Because otherwise, how in the world is like Sophie's Choice? How would we choose
I
what to
don't
put in?
know.
So
Because
everything, it was like a workhorse. So the Soul archive itself became like the through line for the story. And then we had to weave the biography and marry the biography of the show and the biography of the man. So that was like our modus operandi for figuring out the structure of the film. It was very challenging.
since the politics of the period kind of drives the timeline and eventually leads to the closing down of the show,
Mhm.
um, did that wind up being the main thing that guided you, or because they're so free in the beginning, and then you see you see more and more anger on the outside, and you see them more worried about censorship, and then you hear Nixon talking, and then there they go. Uh,
Yeah. What's interesting is the we always knew we'd have to have a villain. Every good story has one, right? That was easy. That was the easy part. The tricky part was finding a way that was balanced to show how Nixon he had his own 3 acts. So he kept interfering and interrupting. He was like an interloper.
Mhm.
Every time something good happened, here comes Nixon, and so we structured it in a way that by the time you got to the capitulation of the story, where Nixon was becoming really vocal about, um, being dissatisfied with liberal media, needing to control the images and the stories about the White House and administration, by the time you got to that part, he had earned the denouement. We knew that we needed the big moment at that moment, the sort of the aha moment, or um, you know the thing that would turn the whole film. Because there was another element that happened throughout, which was that the show actually was in almost could lose funding every single year. It was in
Mhm.
unfortunately in jeopardy. But we that would not ride with the storyline. So we focused on the very end,
Yeah.
when clearly it was coming down from up above. Um, and
One of
that
the
was
things that I think is most wonderful in the film is the contrast between, I don't know whether you call it a dance number uh, but the person who is in heavy makeup, the part about drugs,
oh yes,
the
that's George Faison.
heroin thing compared to Nixon's statement on the war on drugs. You get the difference between the two cultures, and it couldn't be more of a chasm. But can you talk a little bit about making that juxtaposition?
Yeah, that was really important, because what we know now about Nixon is very different from what was happening then. And certainly this idea that we now know that he was not quite fond of people of color, that's putting it lightly, and that the war on drugs that he created was really an attack on people of color disguised as a war on drugs. And so, with that sort of innuendo, we
Yeah,
decided to show the way he was dealing with drugs, and the Black community, really, and how the Black community was responding to drugs. And in this case, it was an artistic rendition, because George Faison, the most wonderful choreographer,
uh,
was creating ballet, a beautiful, incredible ballet that responded to the issue of drugs. It was called Poppy. And that was a way of sort of illustrating what happens in the Black community, how folks are impacted by drugs, especially in the 60s. And that was important because it was topical, and it was certainly controversial, but it was a way to express these issues through art, sort of like art as activism.
yeah.
And it's very interesting to juxtapose, the enemy of the people, which we now know was people of color, in Nixon's opinion, and what the people were actually doing and responding to it in their world. And so you see that sort of rubbing that's happening, which could lead very well to wanting to take something like that off the air, because it's a pushback on what the administration, the perception coming out of the administration of people of color being criminal minded, and worthless. And so I thought it was really important to show
How
that.
did you get the letters of the people?
The
How did you
letters
get the letters of people wrote asking that the show not be taken off the air?
Here's the thing, it's hard to express, and certainly we tried to show with like a graphic, a lovely graphic piece, all the letters coming in. There were 20,000 letters, 20,000
I'm not
handwritten
surprised.
or typed or drawn letters. Some letters were actually coming from people who were imprisoned, incarcerated, and people who were not people of color. It was a myriad batch of letters from all different kinds of people. Christopher Lucas, who was the original creator of the show, he kept a lot of those letters. Everything that came in, he kept. And so luckily, he had a huge stash of letters, and we cataloged them. We went through all of them. I was able to scan them. And it's just fascinating, because you're looking at this ephemera from 1968 through 73. And the letters started in 1969, because Ellis thought, well, how else can I engage people to keep the show on the air? If you think about that, and a modern day campaign, we have email, we have social media, all these other ways. I can imagine that 20,000 letters of support would equal, millions and millions of tweets and posts and Instagram
Oh,
posts.
yeah,
So
counting
it's
hits.
remarkable.
Just,
But there was something very hands-on about the show and very immediate. And the response to the show was very immediate too. I thought it was important to show that because our contemporary audience, we have so many options on television and media. Shows get canceled all the time. Who cares? You watch the next one. But there was something about this show when there were only 3 networks and public television that this was the option and this meant so much to people. So the loss had to be palpable. And so
um,
that's why we did that.
this brings me to the fact that you finished the film in 2018, and you've been bringing it to festivals and winning awards for a long period of time. When you run into younger people at festivals, can they understand that idea that you wait all week for a certain night when that show is coming on?
No, they can't. I think the only thing people have waited for was like Game of Thrones in the last couple of years.
Uh,
Waiting for that Sunday night. But it's very interesting because one of the things we had to do with the film was to create this sort of telegenic moment that would transport you back into that look and feel of public television of that era, and to also sort of paint a tableau of what the broadcast landscape was like to
oh, I love the
understand.
thing you have in the beginning of what
Yeah,
normal to the network TV looked like back
that
then.
was important because you have to understand what Soul was interrupting
Yeah.
in order to appreciate why it was so unique and so revolutionary.
Do you
Um,
have any idea what the demographics of the audience were? Who was watching it?
there was a huge amount of folks of color. The irony is, it's hard to have an accurate poll because not many people of color were being polled at that time just because of the timing of it.
Yeah.
And there was always a joke that the Nielsen's didn't go above 59th Street. I'm sure that might be a little accurate, but that might be a little
Might not be a
fable.
joke. Yeah.
Yeah, or what do they call it? Urban legend. But that's what Ellis Haizlip said. And he would, but so what PBS did was they hired out several polling agencies to be able to take a poll to accurately understand what the show was doing in the ratings. And it was really well received. Now, the first year it was a, um, a local show. And then after the Public Broadcasting Act, that's when the system of PBS channels all came together to become the public broadcasting system. And then at that moment, the show went national into all the markets. The question was whether or not the show was actually shown, even if it was given to a station, because it was rather, um, you know, controversial and somewhat revolutionary.
Um, Tell me about your process and how, I mean, even for a documentary that's very labor intensive, this seems to
Yeah.
be especially, to have been especially challenging and very exciting in the challenge that it presented. How long did it take you to do this?
Wow. It actually took 10 years. And I think most,
Okay.
I know, just, 10 years, a decade. I think the most important the way to explain that length of time is twofold. We decided, like, specifically what was important to us was the provenance of the show had to match how the film was going to be built. And so we knew that the show had been designed for the people by the people. It was also funded publicly by grants, a huge grant from the Ford Foundation and more money from CPB, Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And so for us, we thought, well, if we're going to continue sort of this legacy of public television and public broadcasting and um, for the people by the people, we should probably fund this by grants as well. And
Mhm.
so that is a very laborious process. And we started very honestly with R&D grants, and then we moved into production grants, and we were awarded by the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities, and then the Ford Foundation came on with finishing funds, and that was great because it's also like an anniversary for them. to say that, they were kind of the incubators, like the Ford Foundation can say, yes, it's our anniversary too. 50 years ago, we funded this show, which was really about the diversity and inclusion for broadcasting. And so for them, that's a real win, like an anniversary of the incubation of freedom of expression and social justice programming. So
I'm gonna
that
hope
was why it took so long. And
I'm
then,
going to hope that no, I'm sorry, we have a little bit of a sound thing that's making us overlap a little, and I apologize for appearing to interrupt you. But but um, but I'm going to hope that nobody interfered with what you could put in the film, that you had total freedom about what you could include.
yes, that's true. We had total freedom, and that was important. And one of the reasons why we remained so fiercely independent, because we wanted to tell the story as accurately, not just historically, but also emotionally. And there were so many voices that are so important in this film. Then we wanted those voices to be heard. And I think it's really important to have that lens. And we talk a lot now about authorship and representation. And so we wanted this film to be really truthful, and uh, that all the decisions we made around that were based on the desire to really give it um, credibility, and to give it value.
Well,
That was really important because it's such a lost gem, and Ellis Haizlip is somewhat of an unsung hero. And to me, those are can be some of the most important stories. There's a universality around that. Of course, yes, it was about a Black show, but it's also the story of our journey together. This idea that there was so much revolution and struggle happening in the 50s and 60s. We're kind of in that same zeitgeist now as we, you know, deal with all the changes that are happening. And
um, the part at the very end, you must have added that very quickly. The part about that has Vice President Harris in it and has Black Lives Matter. How much time did you have to edit that together and put it in?
right, well, it felt like history was changing right in front of our eyes. And so one of the beautiful things is we decided to release the film in August of 2020 to give it a theatrical release, in hopes that we could, of course, qualify for all of the awards. And we didn't know that the pandemic and COVID would last as long as it did. So our plan was to open in theaters in August. And of course, we had to pivot in order to release the film virtually, and kind of came up with a new model, one that would both support the independent cinemas that we love and the film institutions and organizations and museums. We partnered with them so that we could help keep their lights on. And so when you bought a ticket for the show, for the film rather, you were supporting those independent cinemas that maybe, were your favorite cinemas right down the street.
The
And that
one,
was a really wonderful thing. It allowed us to give back. It allowed us to bring the film to the public at a time of great turmoil, and to have a thing of beauty that was uplifting, and also to support, the cinemas and the art house theaters that we love so much. So
um,
that was
can
just,
we just plug one of them right now?
yes.
Melissa and I are both on the board of the Jacob Burns Film Center and in Pleasantville, New York, and where we streamed it. And if there's one film during this entire period of time that I wish I could have seen with a full house, it's yours.
Oh, thank
Because
you so much.
people would have gone nuts, it was pretty hard to sit still and watch it at home, although I wasn't sitting still that much of the time. Um,
Thank you. It was really special, and we're so happy. And we also, it was so nice to come together, even though we're apart. It was very unusual to be able to be having these collective experiences when we're so far apart because of social distancing. But I have to say, it was one of the most beautiful experiences this summer, in the midst of the chaos and the fear and all of the changes that were happening, and people were protesting. There was a lot this summer, and folks were quite troubled, to put it lightly. So it felt good to be able to offer a film like Mr. Soul, which really is about joy, you know,
Mhm.
Black joy, Black history, but Black history is American history, and the music is just transcendent. So that was important to us to be able to give that back. And we premiered at the Maysles Documentary Center, who will be hosting our chat today. And so that was really exciting too. Another theater that we love supporting.
Weren't you at Tribeca also, or?
Yes, we
No.
premiered at Tribeca, and that was fantastic. And after the show, the premiere, we put on like our version of a Soul episode with the Robert Glasper and his live band, and Blair Underwood came out like Ellis Haizlip, and he sat down in his chair and he kind of held court. And we had the first reunion of the Last Poets performing live, and Sonia
Wow.
Sanchez. It was just so exciting to have, right after the curtain went down, to have that kind of experience. And it made us feel like soul could have a resurgence.
Um, uh, well, I look forward to when we can actually play it live and have an audience, because I think we'll go back and revisit a lot of the things that we missed and treat them right.
Yeah.
Uh, but why did you have the long period of time between when you finished it and when you decided to have an opening?
Yeah, well, we decided to take the film out on a film festival tour, and that went on for a year. We got
It
so
can go
many.
on for 10 years if you want.
Well, we only had a license for 1 year, so we have. It's such a massive, rights intensive piece, and so the rights that we had were film festival rights, so those contracts were up in a year. So we just did as many as we could. I think we did about 50 film festivals around the world, and that was important just to get the word out about the film. We didn't have a distributor at the time, and that was really the way to embrace the community and to be a part of the film community and to get our footing, so that we could try to sell the film after that. We still don't have a distributor, so that was the impetus after the year was over, to just release it ourselves in the virtual theaters. Um, we were
We're
going to
showing a
release.
lot of things that don't exactly have distribution, but we're able to show them anyway because virtual cinema makes a completely different situation.
Yeah, and I think everything is pivoting right now, and we have to, as creatives, sort of adapt to that. And ironically, we are finding a broader reach for our work and a larger audience, even though we're not together. So I
Yeah.
think it has I think it's illuminating the alacrity with which we have to adapt. But that's the great thing about artists and artistry, is that we are already survivors, and that is innate. Um, just being able to create and to continue to create is very challenging anyway. So of course we're going to look for a way to keep doing that. And so I applaud everyone. There's so many great films out this year. Anyone who was able to finish a film or do anything and still remain safe, it's quite an accomplishment.
Were the rights to different artists' work a problem, or had they all signed away rights when they performed on the show?
Well, the rights were most challenging because we have so much premium music.
I
And
know.
so it's not, at that we have 142 music cues in the film,
God.
just a few. And it was very important for us to treat the music like a character. And so it's not there to just be the underpinning of a scene, but it literally is the glue. And that's not just the soundtrack of our lives in each year in that era, but it really acts as a character. And that was very important. So we have a wonderful music supervisor named Ed Gerard,
He's wonderful.
amazing, Grammy winning guy, so great. And we found a wonderful music clearance person. And so together with the team, that's how we were able to approach with great respect all of these artists and their subsequent publishers, to help them understand that being a part of this film and being a part of this story was important. And that was a challenge, but in the end, we cleared every single song. So it was really beautiful. Or as Ellis would say, it's been beautiful.
One of the best things he did was to involve the audience in the music. And like when Wilson Pickett sings "Oh Happy Day" with who Odetta steps up, I think, and
Yes, and Marion Williams, and oh my gosh, just
that's
amazing.
just astounding. Or when Al Green sings and he tells people to look at the women in the audience, they're all swooning. It's so different from the way conventional, by which I mean white, music programs were done in those
Yeah.
days.
I think what was unique for Ellis was this idea that this was an expression of Black love, Black strength, Black sister and brotherhood, and Black community, and not just Black arts and politics, but the sort of full range of the Black experience and this idea of family. And so he wanted to show that and to show the complexity of Black life, which had not, heretofore been treated that way in terms of perception and imaging rather. And so when you see the audience, you realize that the audience members are a part of the show, and the experience they're having, it's almost like that's your transference. You can be that audience too, because you are feeling that way and you are watching and sort of transferring. There's transference happening. Hard to, I didn't articulate that part right,
No,
but you know what I'm saying? There's something so magical about that. And Ellis wanted all of that to be very real so that there's no distinction between the artists and the audience, because everybody, it was all of a piece, if you will.
yeah. Are you in the film at all, or do you do any of the voiceover?
No, I'm not in the film at all. And that was important to me because I felt that the story was so much bigger than me. And that I knew and recognized that we're all standing on the shoulders of giants, but that these particular giants really needed to tell their own story. And I felt that many of them, these are kind of, African American icons of the 20th century, and we won't have them forever. And I've thought if we could have as many of them, tell their own story in this story, it would be not only the story of soul, but the story of an era, the story of America. So
Uh,
that's why I just made sure I was off camera all the time. I
um,
have that feeling like Ellis that I want to push the culture forward, but I just want to be in the background somewhere.
well, I don't think anybody can watch it without thinking who made this.
Oh, that's true. That's true. No, you have a point.
Uh,
I knew that it wasn't my story to tell as an auteur inside of the film. But yes, I understand wanting and shaping. That was all my vision. Yeah. But
uh,
with an amazing team, because it takes a team, we had the most fantastic team to pull it all together.
Finally, um, you must have some favorite moments that gave you chills every time you went near them. I know what mine were. What were some of yours?
Oh, tell me yours first, because then we'll see if we're twins.
I've been talking about them, but that moment of dance, I'm terrible with names, but
It's
the
okay.
amazing dancer who was married to Jeffrey Holder,
Yeah, yes.
uh, that
Carmen de Lavalade.
a lot of the dance, the young
Yeah.
Nikki Giovanni. You wanted me to do something that included talking to Giovanni, and I told you I felt I was not worthy to
Oh,
speak to her, but she was just awe-inspiring. Uh, Watching the Black poets and thinking about what their influence was. A lot of it is thinking about the influence of that time on the long roots that it wound up having, and how much of that, because I'm very interested in music, how much of that uh, had an effect later on, seeing younger Billy Preston and knowing what he was like later, or just seeing how important this stuff was, and the idea that it was all there in one place, and it wasn't more widely known. among suburban high school kids who then went to colleges that were outside the New York area, which is what my experience was. So I wasn't even around to see it. But it's just full of these miracles. That my one regret is that no song gets completed.
I know.
If you'd added 3 more hours to get the full versions, I would have been very happy.
I am the same way and of the same mind. It was so frustrating because there was never a time when you could just sort of sit in a song and hear the whole thing. There is
Yeah.
one moment, which is one of my favorites, one of my personal favorites, in which Gladys Knight sings, and she's singing "If I Were Your Woman." She's wearing that beautiful purple outfit, and the camera comes around her, and she's just so young and beautiful with that purple ribbon in her hair. And it's a moment that really has no political ramifications. It's not necessarily advancing the plot. It's just a moment of pure joy that we can just sit in. And then the camera comes around and you see the pips, and you're like, oh my God, it's the pips. And then the
But
camera moves
it's
a
not
little
the Pips
further.
first. You have to. I mean, the Pips first. You get her, and yeah.
I love that moment. It's so beautiful because that's one of those moments when when the archive just opens up and you're seeing this beautiful artist at her youngest, and she's so innocent and so pure almost, although of course, she wasn't. But I'm just saying, when you get to see the archive like that in action, it's just gorgeous. There were a couple of moments like that I could have listened to the whole thing. The conversation between James Baldwin and Nikki
Oh,
Giovanni.
that. Yeah. I mean, that's a
And
book.
that is a book. It's actually a real book. It's
Oh,
they, yeah, I'll go get it. It's right
okay.
in well, hold on, I'll show you. Let's turn on the lights. This. Okay. So
They
this
hold it closer.
this is the book. You can see all my notes.
Oh, oh, okay. I did
And
not know
it's
that.
actually
Wow.
the transcription of the 2-hour episode between James Baldwin and Nikki Giovanni was so incredibly inspiring that they made it into a book. This book is a rare book that's very hard to find, but you can find it. It will cost between $400 and $1,000, but because it's a rare book in its first edition. But the idea that something could become so iconic,
Mm.
and that James Baldwin was having conversations like this. Also, he had one with Margaret Mead at the time. But the fact that he had it with Nikki Giovanni in London and that it was part of the Soul episode, I just find that so remarkable. And it was a
Well,
2-hour episode. So if they played it in 2 parts, like a special. And I remember thinking, we could make a whole movie out of this.
you could make a 5-year series out of all of this. You must have so much other material that you could use. And
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's only 2 hours, really.
It was hard, but I'm hoping that I think of it as almost like the gateway drug into soul, it's a portal, the film, because then you can explore the series on your own and enjoy the full length of the all the performances. And it is streaming. You can watch the show right now. It's on
Oh,
Amazon
really?
Prime. Yeah,
Where?
it's on Amazon Prime. You can watch 24 episodes there. The Soul,
Fantastic.
yeah, and the Soul series is also streaming on. It's a platform called Shout Factory. They have a lot of retro programming. So Shout Factory has the same
Oh,
24
that's
episodes.
great. When did it come back on because of your film, or was it going to anyway, or?
I didn't have anything to do with that, but I'm sure that it has evolved since what we were always hoping, that the film would shine a light on the series and that would encourage them to re-release it, because it really was made for the public. And that is so special that now you can see it again.
Well, bravo to you. Thank you for bringing back so much joy and wisdom and beauty and excitement and such important moments and just exhilaration. Thank you for bringing it, exhuming it from the past and bringing it back into our current life. And it's a lot to hope for that we can have moments like that again, but I really hope we can. And you've given us a wonderful gift. That's all.
Oh, thank you, Janet. Coming from you, that means the world.
Well, I mean it. So I loved it. So um, anyway, one of these days we will actually meet live. This is our first meeting, even though we're on the same board. So one of these days we will meet in person, and I can tell you that until you get tired of hearing it. But for
Oh,
now,
I'll never get tired, that's for sure. But I do hope it's sooner than later.
I hope so too. I hope this passes. Anyway, um, uh, thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Oh, thank you. This has been wonderful. Or as Ellis would say, it's been beautiful.